Welcome to Spooky Reviews from Spooky Ventures. This is the 16th edition, and this time I'm going to be looking at Gamera, the complete collection from Arrow Films. This is a new Blu-ray set and includes 8 discs with all 12 Gamera films across those discs. Now, there are a couple things I want to get out there early. First, I don't have the actual box set. What I was sent to review are preview discs of all the Blu-rays with no box or extras. For that reason, I can't comment on those elements except to tell you that the full set includes both an 80-page book and a 120-page comic. I'd also like to point out that while this is Spooky Reviews, most of these movies are not horror or really spooky. However, since they are monster, or more accurately kaiju, which translates to strange beast movies, I think they qualify. Now, with those caveats out of the way, I should probably qualify this by saying that I'm not really all that well versed in the genre. Don't get me wrong, I've always appreciated that genre and seen quite a few Godzilla films. But I don't think I'd ever watched a Gamera film before. Making my way through the entirety of the film history was a time-consuming event, but it was also very entertaining. I can say that I am definitely a fan of Gamera now. For those who, like me, are newcomers to the world of Gamera, the monster was created as a competition to the Godzilla series, and as such it does seem to be a bit of a copy early on. Gamera is a huge turtle-like creature who shoots flames and can fly via jets in his leg sockets. The first series of films, 8 movies, began with Gamera the Giant Monster. That film was a pretty standard science fiction horror film of the time. As you might expect, the effects were cheesy, but that's almost one of the charms of those type movies. By the second movie, they had made the transition from black and white film to color. A second monster was added to provide the opportunity for Gamera to fight something his own size. That would be the pattern for the future films. It was also the first to start to establish Gamera as a hero. As the first series of movies continued, there were trends that began to emerge. One of these was the Gamera versus aspect that I had mentioned. Another was that there was a transition from Gamera as a monster to be feared to Gamera as almost a superhero. A connection to children was established, with children being able to communicate with him. He became known as the friend of all children. Consequently, the movies evolved from being more serious fare designed for adults to more children's movies. Another trend that began early on was recycling footage. As the series continued, scenes from the earlier movies were incorporated, eventually taking up more and more running time of the newer films. It got a little annoying after a while, but perhaps that's because I was watching the movies over such a short period of time. I love how, while the concept of Gamera battling some other monster or monsters, often for the benefit of humans, was reused across the films, they managed to breathe new life into the stories much of the time. The movies are generally not carbon copies of each other. Sure, you know that there will be some big battles, but the stories that live around those are different from movie to movie. I have to say that despite, or maybe because of, the focus towards simple kids' movies, I found the entire series, with one exception, to be a lot of fun. That one exception was the final movie of that bunch, 1980's Gamera Super Monster. Apparently by that point in time, the studio was in a lot of trouble financially, so the use of old footage concept was put into overdrive. In fact, in addition to borrowing footage from the earlier movies in the series, it also used shots from Space Battleship Yamato and Galaxy Express 999. The story revolved largely around a group of, quote, space women who could disguise themselves as human, but then through a complicated series of motions become their real selves, and a ship of space pirates on its way to subjugate Earth. It felt more like a Power Rangers movie that just happened to have Gamera in it in a lot of ways. Yet it also, remember stock footage, incorporated monsters from the entire series. It's the only one in the whole set that I felt like skipping through. The movie seemed to end the Gamera series, but just like our hero, the movie series is never truly gone. It would be 15 years until Gamera would return. 1995 saw a reboot that started with the movie Gamera Guardian of the Universe. Our favorite flying monster turtle was back, as was one of the villains from the earlier series, Gaios, a giant bird-like monstrosity. The new run of films had a much higher production value. The effects were vastly improved. The story was more serious and well developed. They also got pretty deep into a mythology of the various monsters and their creation. In some ways, I've always found those aspects of all monster movies a bit confusing. I'm not sure that the explanation in these three films made it less so for me. I found that aspect a bit difficult to follow and a little silly. Still, the suspension of disbelief means that I don't actually need to buy into every bit of it. I'm not sure I'd call the first movie of the reboot series horror, but the tone was definitely much different than the earlier films. With the second movie of the new run, Gamera 2 Attack of Legion, it definitely did cross over into some real horror territory. The Legion creatures are downright frightening. I think that the horror aspect was the thing they got the most right on that film. Before I get into the third movie, another thing I really liked about this new set of films was the fact that there were several recurring characters. Those characters grow and evolve as the series continues, lending a sense of the viewer having a bit more invested in what happens because you learn to really like those characters and care about them. Gamera 3 Revenge of Iris has more of that horror aspect. What that movie captures better than any of the rest is the realistic impact of having gigantic monsters battling one another. They show it in human terms in a way that has probably never been done in other movies like this, or even superhero movies. As I told my wife when watching this one, if you saw Thor battling Loki, you really need to get to a safe distance, and I'm not sure what that distance is, rather than standing around watching it. They make that aspect very clear in the film. While the communication relationship between human and monster has been present through a lot of the Gamera films, it takes a really weird twist in one scene in this movie. The young woman standing before Iris, that's her name for a strangely evolved Gaios that seems like a cross between Cthulhu and some kind of alien, says, "I'm hot." Then we get a scene that, while not explicit, seems to hint at another Japanese export, tentacle erotica. It's not, as I said, it's not explicit, but it is strongly implied. It's also more than a little cringeworthy and definitely a departure from the family-friendly Gamera of the past. Beyond that, though, while I liked the film a lot, there were some other issues. For one thing, I think the storyline was a bit hard to follow. More importantly, though, they end it with a doozy of a cliffhanger. I have a hunch they plan to continue it in a fourth film, but that movie has never happened. While that next movie in the series was never made, it was not the last time we saw Gamera. Gamera the Brave in 2006 gave us a new origin story for Gamera, or perhaps a new Gamera. With that film, they brought the improved effects and richer writing from the first reboot. Instead of the serious, more adult tone, though, we are back in kid-friendly zone with a movie that is very child-centric. I have to say that it was a lot of fun. Sure, it has some silly moments and is nothing deep, but it's just a good time movie. It's one of my favorites of the series, really. I think it appeals to the child in all of us. There are numerous bonus features sprinkled throughout the discs. Those consist mostly of interviews. I watched a few of them, but not all of them. Part of that was just getting through all the movies in a timely fashion to get a review done was challenging enough that I didn't want to add the time of watching all the bonus features. I would say that perhaps a bigger factor was the fact that I wasn't really able to properly appreciate these. It's one thing to watch a movie with subtitles. All these films are in Japanese with English subtitles, although some of them do have some English in them, but another thing entirely to watch an interview that way. More hardcore fans of kaiju films will probably really appreciate those segments, though. I don't need to see them to recommend this. I was convinced by the movies. I had a great time making my way through them, and I'm happy to be a fan of Gamera now. Spooky Ventures is the home for spooky content and spooky merchandise on the web. Check it out today at spookyventures.com. And remember, always keep it spooky.